Hey guys, I want to welcome you to the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast. This podcast is completely dedicated to exploring Alaskan peaks, no matter the elevation, and connecting with the climbers and mountaineers who challenge themselves to summit them. My goal is to release 2 episodes each month that allows you, the listener, to hear and connect with some incredible journeys and experiences from climbers and mountaineers of all levels. On this month's episodes, we talk to Jon Curtis and Lane Christensen and their individual journeys in summiting some local peaks within the popular Chugach Mountain range. Jon's epic Pioneer Peak summit challenged his own physical and mental strength as he was forced to take the long, grueling descent with an injured leg after summiting Pioneer Peak. We also chat with Lane Christensen, one of the board directors for the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, and his trip up Bashful Peak. Despite encountering some harsh conditions and having to make 2 pushes for the summit, Lane and his team ultimately bagged the climb, claiming the first winter ascent of Bashful Peak. You can find all of our episodes streamed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and Audible. This is the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast. All right, Jon, welcome to the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast, man. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, dude. It's been a bit, man, since we've seen each other. I know we just got done talking about it before we started, but you've been off traveling a bit, going to some warmer climates, getting away from Alaska, and I know I've been traveling for work. But super pumped to see you, dude, and chat with you, specifically on Pioneer Peak today, which we're going to get into here shortly. And also, thanks for supporting the podcast. You're literally the first episode and the first guest, man. So super pumped and appreciate it. So before we get into the actual Pioneer Peak and chatting about that, man, I want to provide just a little bit of context of how you and I know each other, right? So you and I first met each other during a mountaineering course with the MCA, Mountaineering Club of Alaska, which was, when was that? Do you remember?
Beginning of August.
August time frame. Okay. Yep. August time frame. Yep. Again, through the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, went out to Hatcher's Pass at the Mint Hut for about seven days, right? I think. So super cool. That was the first time you and I met each other and found that we had at least something in common, right? We were both in the military. Then from there, we started hanging out after the fact. And here we are today, man. We got some cool stuff kind of in the future that maybe we'll talk about in 2026. That you and I have been talking about, climbing some cool stuff. So, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Cool, man. So to start this out, if you would just go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, where you grew up, how you ended up in Alaska, man, and your relationship to mountaineering in particular, and how you started climbing, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So grew up all over the place. My dad was in the military too, so grew up all over the place, but kind of settled down in San Antonio, Texas, which is, not the most mountainous area of the world.
Yeah.
But kind of got into mountaineering just being outside as a kid, doing ski trips with the family and stuff like that. And then at some point in college took a free climbing class with the university.
Nice.
I went to, and then
did your university have a climbing gym at it? I know a lot.
We had a very small climbing gym, but it existed.
Yeah,
enough to get a couple people on the wall, and learn some basic stuff. But yeah, so a little mixed in there, my brother did. My brother and I did a dirt bag style road trip where we hopped in the car for about a month and drove around the West and started trying to get up mountains and figure out what we were doing. So that's kind of where it all started. And then ended up in Alaska with the military, and
nice.
Yeah, was very happy to get up here.
Yeah, did you guys want to come up here?
Yeah, it was our first choice. So.
Yeah, heck yeah, same with us, man. Yeah, it's super, super cool. What kind of climbing did you do, style of climbing did you do before you got up here to Alaska and started the mountaineering stuff?
Yeah, before I got up here, it was mostly very simple gym sport climbing. A little bit. I took a lead clinic at one point, did a little bit of that, but didn't get too much into it since there's not a ton of lead climbing to do outside in Texas where I was at, but did some of that. And then stuff we did was just your simple hike with maybe a little bit of scrambling thrown in there out in Colorado and Wyoming areas.
Right on. Yeah, so I guess coming here, was the mountaineering course that you did here kind of your first taste of mountaineering, or did you do a little bit before the course?
That was pretty much my first taste of like what you like real mountaineering and actually doing stuff.
Yeah, kind of getting into the glacier travel and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that was probably my first taste as well. I mean, obviously I did a few small peaks prior to that, but that was kind of my first taste. So, but cool, man. Yeah, glad you're enjoying Alaska, man. And I know what you're here for. Another 2-3 years, right?
2 or 3 years, hopefully.
So you got some time to bag some more peaks, man, which is super cool. So right on, man. Yeah, I think that's cool to like be able to hear people's kind of background of climbing, right? Because everybody has kind of a different story of how they started climbing and what got them into it. What actually got you into climbing? Actually, kind of go back a little bit. Like, did you see Chris Sharma, doing some bouldering stuff, or what?
I think it started, being a kid and just being a like boy outside, like climbing trees and other random stuff, like, and that eventually just turned into like, oh, I'm older now, there's a mountain, let's go up it.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Didn't stop.
Did you meet well, you kind of mentioned, right, there was a clinic offered, right? And did like your buddies kind of talk you or you just find it advertised somewhere?
Yeah, I just kind of found it advertised. Like our school made us do we had to do like a PE like credit, so it was like, oh, you can either like take a boring PE class or go take rock climbing. And I was like, that looks pretty fun. Yeah, and so I met some people through there, and they offered a lead clinic to do after we finished the class. So
yeah, that's dope. That's probably way cooler than playing dodgeball or something.
Yeah,
at recess, right, doing some climbing. Cool, man. Yeah, I think it's super cool to hear the background of where people started. So, well, cool, man. So let's kind of get right into the particular peak that we're talking about today, which is Pioneer Peak, right? And I'll tell you what, the first time that I saw Pioneer Peak, I was in awe. It's probably even to this day, man. Like when I look at Pioneer Peak from like Palmer, it's probably like my favorite mountain to look at because it's like just this epic looking mountain, if you will. I can't really explain it, but I remember the first time I saw it, I was at a Wilfer Wilderness First Aid class in Palmer. And after that course with all the folks that attended it with me, we were at Matanuska Brewing in Palmer. And a guy was talking about climbing Pioneer Peak. And again, the first time that I saw it, he was talking about how you can summit it going on the north face or the long Pioneer Ridge, which we did, right? And again, to this day, dude, like even driving in the Palmer, man, you can even ask Allie, my wife, like my head's like down at the floorboard trying to look at the peaks. I think it's super cool and epic. So super cool peak. So let's go ahead and get into talking about it, dude. So talk to the trail access, right? Of how that looks, so like the listeners themselves can kind of hear what that sounds like. Then also get into the weather that we experienced that day, maybe some gear that you took with you, etc.
Yeah, so getting there's pretty easy. Like just pull off to a trailhead parking lot off the side of the road, kind of down the Knik River, in the Palmer area. So about an hour drive from Anchorage for folks who live there. But as far as access getting there, and then the trail, roughly like 7-ish miles one way, and I think I clocked about 7,000 feet of elevation gain on the hike that day.
Yeah, that's what I'm showing too. Like even using just getting basic data off of like all trails, right? It's about 66 to 7,000 elevation gain.
Yeah, but weather that day, it was wasn't like horrible weather, like a little bit of light snow once we got up there, a little bit of clouds. So, we didn't get the amazing Bluebird Day views that you can get out there.
Yeah. We got some good breaks in the in the clouds there.
It was also like early fall or mid fall, so like the tundra had turned into all the colors and everything. So that was another cool thing to see.
Yep, and if you haven't gathered by now, at least like the listeners, John and I did Pioneer Peak together, so it was a super cool experience. So talk to me, man, like the very first, like once you hop on the trail from the parking lot, like what's it like? What are the conditions, and what people that are listening that haven't done it that may want to do it, like what can they expect?
A lot of mud. It was very muddy starting off. Like pretty much until you're above the tree line. Like it's pretty much all mud. If it's been raining recently, I guess there's probably some times of year where it's a little drier, but pretty steep, pretty muddy going for first like 2 or 3 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Once you break out of the tree line, it gets a little nicer and easier to navigate. So.
Yep. Yeah, dude. And like even the reviews, and I'll keep using all trails because it's kind of what I use for reviews and stuff. But same thing for us, man. Yeah, like you mentioned, it was super muddy majority of the time. It's almost frustrating sometimes walking through all that stuff. But yeah, then super for the most part, you start going uphill and there really isn't any leveling off for a while, right?
Yeah, and once you hit the ridge, you're like, oh, maybe we're almost there, because we couldn't see the peak from the ridge. It was like, how far away are we?
Yeah.
And it kind of levels off there a bit, but then you just start going up again.
Yep. I don't even think. So I guess now getting into like gear, any kind of gear what type of gear did you in particular bring for this trip?
Yeah, so we brought definitely more than we needed. Like brought some like harness and rope and stuff to try to do some rappelling or something, just to mess around once we got up there, practice some of the stuff we learned in our mountaineering class. But like as far as stuff like I think was absolutely necessary to have, like micro spikes to wear in the mud. Like I've never done that before, and I think you mentioned doing that. And after doing that, I'm like, definitely we'll be doing this in the future.
Yep.
Trekking poles were useful. Gaiters to keep the mud out. A couple of the big ones, and then just like extra water, extra snacks and stuff like that, because it's a long day. Yeah.
It's a super long day, as you mentioned, man. The what'd you clock? You said one way 7 something, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, about 7. It was like about 14 in total.
Yep. Yeah. So out and back, 14 total. And just like you said, man, it is a brutal day. And I've talked to other people that have done it, and like their response is the same. Like, dude, it's a brutal one day trip doing Pioneer Peak. And we did South Pioneer Peak, right? We didn't even do North Pioneer Peak, which is really the highest point. Yeah. Which is only, I think, I don't know how much higher South Pioneer Peak. I can't remember.
A few hundred feet.
But Pioneer Peak, at least, I think, I can't remember. I'm showing 6,637 feet. I'm sorry, that's the elevation gain. I can't remember what the actual summit height is. It's around that. So an elevation gain is very similar to the actual the peak itself. So like you're just raging for 7+ miles, which is crazy. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Pioneer Peak, to get on it, right, is in kind of Palmer area, right? Just again for the listeners, if you take Old Glen Highway towards Palmer, stay to the right onto, I think, East Knik River Road is what I'm showing, for about 2.5 miles. And then shortly after passing Tempera Street, I think it's what it's called, on the right-hand side, is kind of the trail access to it for the Pioneer Ridge Trail parking. And I can't remember, is there a fee for that?
Yeah.
There is a fee box, right?
It's different than, like, it's near the state park, but it's owned by like the Matanuska-Susitna Borough, I think.
Okay, yeah.
If I'm saying that right, but it's owned by them, so it's different from like the Chugach State Park, which a lot of people in Anchorage are probably familiar with.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I didn't even know that. So that's cool to know. But yeah, man. So yeah, you kind of already talked about the weather, gear list, some stuff that you took with you. Yeah, I always, speaking of like micro spikes, I know I've done some other peaks before, and like having micro spikes in mud is awesome. I typically always bring my micro spikes. I even use them when it's dry. If it's just a really steep summit that I'm doing, I'll still bring them because I just feel more secure when I get those spikes on them. So definitely bring micro spikes. Trekking poles you mentioned, and then I think that's pretty much it, man, for like Pioneer Peak that we would recommend. And I don't know, since we didn't do North Pioneer Peak, I'm not sure how much gear or safety gear you would want for North Pioneer Peak, but we couldn't even see it, right? Because at the summit there, it was
it was totally like white out.
Yeah.
Not completely white out, but probably,
Yeah,
good
pretty
50,
much.
100 feet of visibility in the clouds.
Yeah, we got some breaks every so often.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Any like highs and lows that happened during Pioneer Peak, which I know one that we could talk about, but I'll let you take that one over.
So I would say big low, like doing the thing was great, like great experience, but the big low was maybe 300 feet from the summit. Like my knees started feeling a little funky. I was like, I don't know what's going on with this. And then by the time we got to the summit of South Pioneer, if I basically took any step down with my right foot, like I had a shooting pain in my knee. Since then, been to the doctor and stuff, and basically, been told strained like ligament on the outside of my knee. I can't, remember which one exactly, but that was probably the big low, because it was like we had plans to, hit the North Peak too and do some stuff there. And I was like, I kind of was at this crossroads of like, well, do I say something or do I kind of push through and see how it does? And like, definitely glad we didn't do that, because by the end of the day, like, it took a while for us to get down. Me kind of hobbling down.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and I'm glad he did, man. And I think right, having the courage to speak up, man, because I know there were times, right, during kind of going back to the mountaineering course when I hurt my ankle. Obviously I spoke up because it was pretty gnarly, but there were times where we were still going on doing things after the fact that I didn't really speak up a whole lot, because I just wanted to get through it, because I didn't want to get helicoptered out or sit in the hut for another 4 days. But yeah, you speaking up, dude, was super clutch, I think. And I think moving forward too, as you and I hopefully get to climb more together, bigger expedition style stuff, I think that communication will be really cool moving forward. So what kind of climbing, man, at least I remember some specific climbing, such as scrambling, that we had to do at the top, right? Can you speak to some of that, like when that happens on the actual trail, maybe some scrambling up towards the top there? Because initially you kind of start out kind of muddy area. Once you break out of the kind of the brush there, then it gets into the ridge line, and then some scrambling, right?
As far as like, let me think, I would say like it's pretty straightforward compared to some other mountains where like it's like a very even progression of like, you go from mud, you go into like the tundra where it's just, and you get into the area where it's like a little more rocky, but like nothing crazy. Like you're just walking by some rocks, and then some maybe light scrambling, and then it gets into a little bit more intense, but probably nothing too crazy. It's probably like the last, 1,000 feet of the climb is when you're pretty much scrambling the rest.
Yeah, it seemed longer. It seemed like a long time, dude. Like once we hit kind of the...
It takes like you're just going slow to not, especially with the weather we had where we couldn't really see much. We didn't want to, make a wrong turn.
Right.
There were definitely a couple of times we had to, turn around and go a different way, because it was like, that's not the
that's right.
safest route up.
Yeah, and you were using a specific app, right, to kind of... I can't remember what app you were using. What app was that?
Yeah, that's what is it? Peak Bagger app.
Was it Peak Bagger?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Just took some tracks that people upload on there that are, relatively accurate.
Right.
When, your phone's getting GPS around the rocks and the mountains. It's not the most accurate, but it's accurate enough to keep you from straying too far off of where most people go, and then you can kind of route find from there.
Yep. Yeah, so I highly recommend using some sort of app, whether that's Peak Bagger or whatever, because once you do kind of get up there and start scrambling, like there's definitely different routes that you can take. So like being cautious of that piece. And I know too, before we hopped on the kind of doing the scrambling, another piece of equipment or gear that I think we would recommend is probably helmets, which we didn't really talk about, right? Because once we got up to the scrambling area, I would recommend helmets. You don't necessarily need it. I think anybody who's been climbing for a long time can probably do it without, but I just want to protect my dome. So like, I think it was just natural for us to like, hey, let's just go and throw them on. Like they're either on our packs or they're on our head.
Yeah. I heard too many stories of people like, oh, I'll be fine, this isn't that bad. And then like big rock comes and
man,
they're really hurt.
Yeah. It's too easy not to put on your helmet, right? If that makes sense. But then we did some scrambling for a while. Then we, as you mentioned, kind of messed up your knee up there, but we made the ultimate decision once we were at the summit to like, hey, let's go ahead and knock off the rappelling that we had planned and just head back slowly, which we did, right? Dude, and it was a grueling... Let's talk about the descent now, right?
Oh, yeah.
That was a grueling descent, man. Like,
yeah, because I had like a, minimal first aid kit with me, so I was able to, do a little bit of like ace bandage wrap on my knee that, arguably, I don't know if that helped. I had some ibuprofen I like, down real quick, and then was like, well, we'll go. And the poles helped, but it was like, I can't remember exactly how long it took us to get up there, but it definitely took us longer to get down, which is not usually the case when doing that much elevation gain. Because it was, for me, it was pretty much like, if I bent my knee and put too much weight on it, like it was just a shooting pain. So it was like sometimes I'd have to stop because, knee would start like twitching or something weird like that. And like, well, we're going to make it down eventually, but take our time. So
yeah, dude, it was brutal. I always, I'm a fan obviously of going uphill versus downhill. I think obviously downhill is so much harder on your knee, especially with weight on your back. But yeah, that was a long downhill, not necessarily because you hurt yourself, but it was just long. Like my feet and my knees were also hurting. Yeah. But at least, again, for the listeners, right? At least you get to pick some blueberries on the way up, right? Or on the way down. Yep. So you get a little piece of energy if you run out of food. There are some blueberries up there. So if you guys need that for some extra energy, it was super cool. Yeah, we didn't really see anybody up there either, other than maybe 4 to 6 people, right?
About, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot of people, at least during that time of the year. We're up there doing it. In terms of weather, we kind of already talked about the clouds, and we did have snow, right? Didn't we? Like right before we started scrambling, didn't we have a little bit of snow up there? It started snowing for like
it was like the very beginning of like flurries thing, but there was no real snow on the ground.
Yep. There were some snow fields up there, from what I remember. I think just from older snowfall, but so. Yeah, eventually we got down, man. Going down, as we mentioned, was brutal, especially with the mud, right? Because you're slipping all the time. Even with micro spikes, some of the really steep areas. Heck, we got down. We started. Do you remember what time we started? I mean, was it like right at sunrise? I can't remember if
it was right around sunrise. So I think we started around like
pretty close,
7, 8 a.m. Yeah, we weren't down till after dark.
Yep. Yeah, we got down, I think, just after sunset.
Yeah.
So which was crazy. Yeah, man. So brutal hike for Pioneer Peak. And honestly, like, so when we did the mountaineering course together, our instructor, Dave Staley, which is an epic dude, which I'm really hoping I'm going to get him on the podcast one day. I've been emailing him back and forth a little bit, but he doesn't respond a whole lot to the podcast piece. So we'll see. So Dave, if you're listening to this, man, I want you on the podcast, dude. Anyway, he mentioned to us, when I was talking about Pioneer Peak, and he said that Pioneer Peak is kind of a rite of passage for like mountaineers starting out. Like that's kind of one of the first peaks, if you will. So that kind of stuck with me. Yeah, I'm glad we got it done, man. Even though we didn't do North Pioneer Peak, but hopefully one day we can go back up.
Oh yeah,
as brutal as it is, but cool, man. Anything else you want to add to the overall peak itself, man? Kind of the ascent or the descent that you wanted to chat about?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we kind of covered a lot of the bases, but like as far as like one thing that's stuck with me from it is like how quickly a minor seeming like injury can turn into a bigger deal.
Yeah.
And like how important it is to like not only have like the mental strength to push through that, but also to be able to like figure it out. Because like really, especially like when you get farther out, like, no one's coming to rescue you. You're not going to get a helicopter because you tweaked your knee or something. It's like, I think they come like loss of life or limb is kind of the moniker I've heard of. Like that's when you should, whip out the inReach and press SOS type thing. So it's kind of like being able to like self-rescue in a way and like get yourself out of a situation like safely. And I think like we made the right decisions of stopping when we stopped. Thankfully, I didn't get hurt till we're right at, one of the summits at least. So we still got to, hit that. But then we came down, made our way down, like didn't take too long, but, didn't try to rush it and, fall or something on the way down and hurt ourselves more or anything like that. So like, as far as like decision making goes, like we definitely, like that's kind of stuck with me. Is like, okay, we made the right decisions there. Not putting ourselves in a bigger state of risk or anything.
Yeah, dude. I think, and we're fairly new to the sport, right, of mountaineering, as we kind of already alluded to. But like you have to be humble in those situations, right? You can't try to be a G.I. Joe or whomever, and try to just push through it. So there's definitely a time and place for that. I remember something funny that actually I was talking with my wife, Allie, last night about kind of going through some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about today. And she mentioned one thing, and I was like, oh, yes, we have to talk about that during tomorrow's episode. Do you remember anything funny or interesting that happened at the end of all of this? Like when we got back and we were completely done. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Talking about getting locked out of my running car.
Getting locked out of your running car because Allie was like, hey, you have to talk about when you guys got back, you know, because John drove and then he dropped me off back at the house. And I remember when I stepped out of your car, dude, like my body was just like aching. I was ready just to like lay down. I'm sure you were too. And I was getting all my gear out of the truck there, and lo and behold, you couldn't get back in your truck, right?
Oh yeah, I guess the door shut like part of the way, and my keys decided they wanted to hit the lock button on their own. And so they were still in the ignition, the car was running, and I was just sitting there. Thankfully my wife and I only live 15 minutes away, so she drove over with the spare and got the car unlocked. But
yeah, we tried the old school classic method, I think, of, did we try a clothes hanger at all?
Yeah,
and a few other things.
But that wasn't the last time that happened either. That's happened.
Has it?
I had to get new keys and everything because that's happened twice since then. And I've had to, I keep a clothes hanger in the bed of the truck now, just in case.
Nice, man. Yeah, we were, got locked out, man. Had to wait on your wife to come save you. But at least we got some hot tang out of that deal, right? My wife made us some hot tang, and we hung out for a bit, and then we were finally able to get done with that. So, well, cool, man. So Pioneer Peak, right? The listeners right now, if you guys ever want to do Pioneer Peak, it's an epic peak, as mentioned from really a legend in the local area, Dave Staley. It's a rite of passage, right, from aspiring mountaineers out there. So really cool. Although we got up there, didn't really have a view other than clouds, but hey, that's part of the part of mountaineering sometimes. So if you find yourself still hungry for more mountaineering stories and networking, consider checking out the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, or MCA for short. Founded in 1958, the MCA is a nonprofit organization that is focused on promoting mountaineering, hiking, climbing, skiing, and the preservation of the outdoors and wilderness. The MCA is also active in promoting conservation, trail maintenance, and vital in preserving some of the mountaineering history and place names within Alaska. Additionally, they are the primary organization that manages and maintains 8 backcountry huts available to the public. If you would like more information about joining the club and or volunteering, visit the website at mtnclubak.org. Cool, man. Well, thanks for talking about Pioneer Peak in particular. I now kind of want to move on to, which you kind of already talked a little bit about, the mental piece of mountaineering in general. But again, part of this podcast, right, kind of want to touch on the physical, mental, and spiritual piece of either Pioneer Peak in particular that we did, or just like mountaineering in general. So what can you talk to you, man, about the physical, mental, and like spiritual piece of mountaineering? Again, you don't really have to talk about all three of them, but if there's one that you want to kind of focus on, kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think they kind of all like tie in together. Like, the more challenging stuff you do, the longer it is, the more grueling it is, the more your, physical strength won't get you through it.
Yeah.
Like it will, but you have to be able to, mentally put yourself in a zone to continue walking uphill for, 6,000-7,000 feet, like with what Pioneer is. And, there are mountains that people will do even more elevation gain than that. So I think the mental aspect of that is just like having grit and that kind of stuff. And I've always liked that from the perspective of like, it's a challenging thing. And when you do it, it's really rewarding.
Yeah.
Like to feel like, oh, I actually could complete that. Like I didn't think I would be able to, but did it. And
yeah.
Yeah,
dude, that's interesting how you mentioned like they all kind of fit together, which I honestly didn't really kind of think about that, like leading up to this, to me doing this project here. But that's super interesting, because I was in my mind, I was kind of breaking them out obviously separately. So it's kind of interesting interesting that you said that. Yeah, the mental and physical piece is somewhat visible from a basic standpoint, but like, what about the spiritual piece, man? Like, I have a question in my mind that I want to ask people, like, why do you do it, right? So like, why do you climb mountains? And the reason I bring that up too, part of it is because my wife sometimes asks me, like, why do you do that? Like, it's when you're walking uphill that long for that far, it's hard on your body and it hurts. And I was like, yeah, I know it hurts. And she's like, well, why do you do it then, right? So I want to kind of throw that question your way. Like, what's the drive? The response is probably going to be different for most people, but it's probably going to connect in a lot of ways. So like, why do you climb, and what keeps you going back to like summiting peaks?
Yeah, my wife asks me the same question all the time. So, I think a lot of it is like, not to, give a too basic answer, is like, it's there, like, because it's there. Like, that's
Yeah.
kind of how I always thought of it. Like, there's just been this, internal draw to, go climb a mountain, or like, you're a kid and you're sitting in the backseat of a car on a road trip, and you see a mountain or a hill or something like that, and you're like, it wouldn't be that hard to walk up that. Then you go
Yeah.
and do it, and you're like, this is, brutal. But I think there's a bit of that, and there's also just like the idea of having something that's challenging and then being able to push yourself through that challenge and complete it.
Yeah.
I think is really rewarding, like, just for like mental and spiritual health, of like actually like pushing to a goal, completing that, and then seeing yourself like progress is
That's
pretty
cool,
thing
man.
to do. And I think people should do that in any like aspect of life. But
Yeah.
I think I've just kind of, been drawn to the mountains to be my avenue for that.
Yeah. That's super cool, man. I'm very similar to that. Yeah, dude, like the imagery that you kind of brought into that for me was when you mentioned like driving in a car as a kid, right? And you look up and you see a mountain, you're like, man, I just want to climb that, right? And I think like I can relate to that even today as an adult, right? Like I'm driving in a car past Pioneer Peak, as I mentioned earlier, like in my opinion, one of the coolest looking mountains ever. And I still look up at it and I'm like I want to go climb that again, type thing.
Yeah, the amount of times I've, pulled over and pulled out like a mountain identifying app and like figured out like what the name of that mountain is.
Yeah.
And I'll go down a Google rabbit hole of like seeing if other people have climbed it and like how hard it is to get there and do that. And that's like so easy to do here in Alaska.
Oh yeah. Yeah, dude. It's like endless for sure. Cool, man. That's really interesting. And cool to hear that perspective. Well, cool, man. What's so as we kind of start to close up a little bit, I really just have two more questions for you. Number one is, what's next for you, man? Like, do you have any specific peaks that you're eyeballing right now that if tomorrow you had the opportunity to go summit, you would?
Yeah, so right now, nothing crazy on the radar. Just like trying to get out of the, through the recovery with, physical therapy for my knee and stuff. But, with winter being here, big skier. So looking at, going out to, Hatcher Pass again, Turnagain, and like the big ski spots around Anchorage, and hitting those up, and maybe, just turning it more into go up a mountain and come down type vibe with that. So
heck yeah, man.
We'll see how long it takes for the the knee to be back.
Yeah, and of course you got some other stuff, other personal things that you're working on, flying and things like that. So we'll definitely have to get out. Do you want to talk to just very briefly, kind of at least what you and I currently have planned for like 2026, at least as of right now, unless some crazy stuff changes?
Yeah. So, I mean, we both kind of bonded pretty quickly at the mountaineering course, both like with the goal of like, we're in Alaska, we want to climb Denali.
Yeah,
that's been a goal of mine since before I came to Alaska, and I never really knew what the best avenue to do it was, or how to go about it or get there. I just knew like at some point in the next 30 years of my life, I want to do that. That is big goal. So I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about and trying to play around with and see what's feasible and what's the best avenue, and like where should we focus on training if we're gonna make that push in 26.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So I'm super excited for that. Obviously, we're gonna have to, training wise, we'll have to work around obviously our separate schedules and all that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of training in 2025, and then applying for a permit for 2026 timeframe. And then maybe even adding a few more members to the team if we can get to that point. So, and the cool thing, right? We've got a lot of people that we know from the mountaineering course itself, and then the Mountaineering Club of Alaska that we can reach out to who have done it for some advice. Some really experienced people too, which will be really exciting. Cool, man. So last question before we close this up, man. And I'm going to start really ending the podcast with all of my guests with this is, do you have a favorite mountaineering quote or saying that you want to end with?
Yeah, I will preface with I have no idea who said this. I just, heard someone say it or saw it on Instagram at some point, in the past, couple years. And like the quote just says, like, the summit is only halfway. And that's, yeah.
The summit is only halfway. Nice, dude. So what does that mean to you?
I think,
how do you,
it reminds me that like don't get so bent on reaching the summit if you, like, the summit's halfway. So a lot of times, like, you'll be going out, you'll be so, bent on getting to the summit that you push past a point of no return, or like climbing some in Colorado. Like if you're in the mountains and you stay out too far into the afternoon, next thing you know, there's a lightning storm around you, and there's plenty of stories of people running into that. So
yeah, man,
kind of having a red line of like, I'm going to reach the summit by this time, and then I'm going to turn around. And then also just remembering like, hey, I've got there. Like every time I get to a summit, I think like, oh, this is only halfway, because now I have the other half of the trip down, and making it down is, just as important as making it up, because, who cares if you made it to the summit if you never come off the mountain. So.
Yeah, dude, that's super cool, man. I like how it's super short and like to the point, but it has a very big impact. So that's super cool. Yeah, man, like going back to what we talked about for Pioneer Peak, right? Making those good decisions, right? Good decision making, and understanding that you do have to go back down. And even when you start getting into some more of those more technical areas of a climb, like, cool, you may be able to climb up, but if you don't have a rope, and it's almost, it's evident that you're going to have to somehow rappel down or use some sort of safety gear, like, you need to think about that stuff for sure. So that's cool. Awesome, man. Well, cool, dude. Anything else that you wanted to talk about Pioneer Peak, or in particular the physical, mental, spiritual piece of mountaineering?
I think we pretty much covered all the bases.
Right on, man.
So appreciate you having me on as your first guest.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, dude. Yeah, thanks so much for being on. Super pumped to learn about Pioneer Peak today, and I'm sure we'll talk more in the future. So thanks for coming on, man. We'll see you soon.
See you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a few minutes to like, subscribe, drop a comment, or leave a rating on whatever platform you are using to support the podcast and to reach more current and aspiring mountaineers. As a reminder, if you would like to connect with other climbers, hikers, and mountaineers, consider joining the Mountaineering Club of Alaska at mtnclubak.org. Although mountaineering can sometimes be an individual journey and challenge in itself, there's also something very profound about talking and sharing those experiences with those alike. That's exactly why I started this podcast, to simply connect. This podcast has been produced by myself, and original music has been provided by Emberloom. I am your host, Jon Curtis. Thanks for listening, and safe climbing.